Welcome to today's webinar, Digital Pharma Marketing Trends Shaping 2023, hosted by LiveWorld and Grain Group. Thanks for attending today. I'm Matthew Hammer with LiveWorld. But before I introduce the panelists, I'd like to give you a little bit about the two companies. LiveWorld is a digital agency specializing in social media and technology solution that helps companies create authentic conversations, build stronger customer relationships, and drive behavior change. LiveWorld offers strategy and creative, moderation and engagement services, including adverse event management and reporting, and technology that enriches and scales customer experiences. Grain Group is a brand performance company founded in 2010. They work at the intersection of technology, marketing, and commerce to solve challenges for some of the world's most ambitious brands. Grain represents a new agency model, nimble, data-driven, and built to deliver outcomes. Now let's meet today's panelists. First, we have Danny Flamberg, VP Strategy for HCP and Hospital of LiveWorld. Rishi Katawar, VP of Strategy for DTC of LiveWorld. And Agatha Chang, Managing Partner, Grain Group. Welcome, everybody.
Hello.
Hello, excited to be here.
So before we begin the panel Q&A, each of the panelists will briefly touch on the challenges and changes of 2022 and the trends that are impacting digital marketing and can provide opportunities for 2023. So Agatha, you're first up.
Thank you. So I think, what's exciting about this conversation is that, the pandemic or sort of the post-COVID has really kind of changed how pharma engages in digital media. In 2020, so sort of the shift to sort of like online, digital ad spend increased by over 27%. We expect that number, and you'll see here, it's forecasted to continue to grow, maybe not the same acceleration rate as 2020, but it really kind of moved the industry forward in terms of how we use digital and how we think about digital. And I think with that, that is really kind of that bridge to the future. And, I think that's a big sort of motivator behind sort of the conversation that we're excited to have today. So I think in general, regardless of industry, but in particular in pharma, the digital ad spend is really matching sort of how media consumption is changing. And media consumption is changing, one, because of COVID, but also because of sort of new platforms. I think the opportunity for pharma brands is sort of the real-time feedback and the data that you can collect in digital. And that's going to be important as sort of, brands really need to own their first-party data. But also, I think it's an increased sophistication across your competitive landscape. And, that increased sophistication is kind of urgent and pressing. And interesting for us, and I think we're going to learn a lot about social media today, but it is the third most trusted place for patients to get second to doctors and sort of endemic communities. So social media, regardless of sort of the conversations that might be happening in the news, it's very interesting for us to see this because of sort of that peer-to-peer conversation is valued as much as the conversations that they're having with their physicians.
So social media has become the new playing field for both communication with patients, caregivers, and healthcare professionals. The emergence of digital opinion leaders, new voices, new brands, new potential collaborators have given pharma marketers a new vector to reach and persuade target audiences. And we're going to see how them morph, we're going to see them vetted, we're going to see them interacting across the social media platforms in 2023, and some of them emerging on the national scene in 2023.
So the social media landscape has changed again, and we'll keep seeing this shift in 2023. Now, the market is still dominated by the big five. They still control the market: Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, and YouTube. But what we're seeing now, as Agatha was saying, with the shifting demographics, we're seeing a shift in viewing habits. And that is really bringing to the forefront newer platforms like TikTok and others. And we'll see this shift happening more and more where the traditional players are trying to mimic these changing factors as we move forward into 2023.
All right. Okay, with that as the backdrop, we're going to launch into the panel Q&A discussion, focusing on these three topics. Topic one is emerging social media platforms and established platforms with new opportunities, influencers and digital opinion leaders shaping HCP engagement and behaviors, and data strategy as its impact by critical changes in the media targeting and privacy. So with that, let's go ahead and start the panel discussion here. And Danny, we'll start with you on this first question. So there's a lot of talk about omni-channel media and changing targeting options. So what's working, what's not working, and where will things shake out?
Well, Matthew, in my mind, omnichannel marketing is a really big idea. It's been reduced to kind of a media buzzword that indicates multiple channels and multiple messages in the marketplace. When I think of omnichannel marketing, I think of the big marketing enchilada, the giant strategy that combines clinical data and insight with commercial tactics to form a complex jigsaw puzzle which takes a brand to marketplace. And when I talk about that, I think about it in three ways. I think about the overall strategy. What are the messages? What are the channels? What are the resources? And how does the brand orchestrate those elements together to weave together a comprehensive plan? The second vector of omnichannel marketing is the media plan itself. What's the reach? What's the frequency? What's the efficiency? How is it reported? How is it measured? What are the synergies between the platforms? Those are the key elements. And the third element is what I would call the pipeline or the plumbing, which is the data. What data is used for targeting? What data is collected? What data is reported? What data is analyzed? What data is used to optimize in real time the effect of the media plan and the strategy? So I would encourage people for 2023 to think big, think the big enchilada when you think about omnichannel marketing.
Excellent. Agatha, what's your take?
Absolutely. Sort of as a big media nerd, I think with omnichannel planning or an omnichannel framework, what that means to me in a digital world is that, it's sort of think about your planning is shifting to planning around audiences versus planning around channels. And that way you're also shifting to optimizing by performance. You're not optimizing by how is one channel delivering, you're optimizing against sort of your audience and how it's performing against your business goals. I think for me, the real focus here is, this is sort of omnichannel planning is a critical moment and that opportunity to align your business goals with how you're investing your media dollars in the marketplace. And I think at the net of it, this is really the fuel to help you make or help brands make data-based decisions versus channel-based decisions.
Yeah, Rishi, you want to get in there?
Sure. So I agree that omnichannel has become sort of a buzzword. And listen, there's not many companies that are doing omnichannel well, because to do it well, you got to ensure that all your data and all your pipes are connected on the back end. And for a lot of our clients in healthcare and pharma, that's very difficult. Now, in 2023, what I do recommend is that pharma and healthcare, focus on getting their multi-channel strategy aligned, right? Ensuring the pipes are connected where the pipes can be connected. So, ensuring when you're doing social that you're also doing retargeting, right? Ensuring that you have all your tags on Google set up properly. Ensuring that these pieces are set up first as the foundation. So then later on in the year, and as you progress, we can start having the discussions around omnichannel. But to kind of, strictly dive into omnichannel, I would say, let's make sure we got multi-channel done, make sure we're doing it right, before we move forward.
All right, great. So sticking with you, Rishi, on this one for social media, which is part of everybody's life, both personally and professionally. So what would you say is the right mix of campaign content, platforms, and frequency?
Yeah, so, I would say it really depends based on the brand team's marketing objectives. But I would say being a good steward of brand marketing, we need to be aware of all the latest and greatest and emerging social channels coming down the pike, but we don't necessarily have to go chasing the big shiny object, right? So I have two main components here, right? When looking at the universe of social media, we need to focus on three main things before we can dive into it. The first thing is governance, the second thing is the audience, and the third thing is content, right? So when analyzing any new emerging platform, we want to make sure that we can monitor for AEs and have the mechanisms in place to capture online conversations. If a platform can't do that right now, at least for branded communication, it's a no-go, right? So we kind of put that in the bucket of, okay, is there a disease state awareness play here? But, we really need to focus on that governance piece. The second piece is audience, right? Is your audience on a, and are they discussing treatment options, patient education, and support on these given platforms? Now, I know as brand managers, we want to be on as many channels as possible, but we need to really analyze, is that given platform right for us, right? Does that platform speak in our brand voice, and does our audience expect us to be there? And lastly, we really need to look at the content frequency of a given channel, right? Does the channel meet the brand persona of our brand as it relates to the type of content that we need to produce, right? Some platforms, like Twitter, we need more and more content at a faster pace, versus LinkedIn, where we can take our time and have a slower content rollout. So as a brand team, can we produce enough content, or does it make sense for us to produce content? And then lastly, I would say, when really, taking a step back and looking at where we should be investing our dollars when it comes to platforms, I kind of look at the 80-15-5 rule, which is, we want roughly 80% of our attention to be spent on core, tried and true social media platforms. We want 15% to be spent on adjacent platforms where conversations around therapeutic areas are happening, but not branded, conversations. And we want 5% to kind of fall in an innovation bucket where, we can take a step back, listen, review the latest and greatest upcoming social platforms, reach out to their brand reps, maybe help them kind of figure out what their feature set should be, how they should be placing the ISI. And as these platforms in the innovation bucket continue to grow, we'll be there, for their growth.
Got it. Okay. Hey, Danny, do you have anything else to say on this topic?
Yeah, I would focus on the 5%. This falls in my mind into the doctors are people too bucket, where you want to think about channels where they're not clogged with competition. If you look at Facebook and you look at and you get any of these branded pharma ads, they come one after another. There's no competitive spacing. So you want to think to yourself, is there some other way we can reach these people? And again, this is a sensibility of both the brand and the marketers. But, in the old days, we used to understand that doctors played golf and played tennis. They like to travel. We now know that a lot of millennial doctors are gamers. So depending upon where a brand is in its life cycle, whether they're launching, whether they're in a competitive battle, whether they're driving usage stimulation, or whether they're near the end of their life cycle, the idea of placing some discrete ads in media channels where the doctors are not overloaded with medical information and clinical information, where they speak to some of their people interests, can be a very effective strategy, and one which we shouldn't ignore, and that would fall clearly in Rishi's 5% bucket.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and really just to support both what, Rishi and Danny are saying is that, whether how your buckets are, how you set it out to, if you're breaking through the clutter, if you're making that connection, your data is going to give you that feedback. And, take a pragmatic approach. Once you're in market, your data is going to let you know if you're making that connection with your target audience. And I know we're going to talk a lot more about data later, but really that's what's going to allow you to adjust sort of your strategic investments in different social channels. And, our hypothesis always going in is that we think the more authentic you are in each channel, that is what's going to drive that performance and engagement rate.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, well, digging a little deeper on social platforms, let's talk about what does what and what goes with what. So it's really the question is how many platforms should we consider? Who's up, who's down, and who's in the future pipeline? Danny, go ahead.
Well, we know from the Pew Research study that the average American has 6 or 8 platforms that they're active on. And we know from the practical reality that the platforms operate in different ways. There are people that look at Facebook 5 times a day. There are people that look at LinkedIn once a month. On the HCP side, there are people that look at Figure 1 or Hippocrates every day for dosing ideas and for treatment ideas and for scans and for clinical data, and that they look at Doximity once a month or when they're looking for a new job. So understanding the different platforms and the different combinations and also experimenting. So for example, around a critical Congress, we might decide to distribute some of the data in one of the walled gardens or distribute some of the presentation on LinkedIn. And then we might message the appearance of our KOL or the appearance of our clinical researcher at the conference using Twitter or LinkedIn. So putting together the pieces and parts is kind of part of the strategy. And the idea is mixing and matching the public and the private platforms for maximum effect. And Agatha can probably talk more about this because she does it every day.
Thanks. Absolutely. I think, that's a great framework for thinking about sort of social media platforms. Where should you play? And I think the big strategic questions that we ask sort of even on just like on the planning side, and I think the work is always done sort of on that initial plan is, where is your audience? And that goes back to sort of the omnichannel conversation. How big are the audiences on each of those platforms? And even if they're small, they might still be worth the effort. And that is sort of a critical brand decision. It may not always be a reach question, but it might be an engagement question. A smaller community might have deeper conversations. Other sort of strategic questions that we ask ourselves before we decide we are going to invest in these channels, because the amount of sort of material that has to go in supporting these channels, it's an ongoing dialogue, it's a real investment, is what are they talking about? And related to what are these different channels talking about is where can we as a brand add value? How can I add value to that conversation? And we mentioned this before, but it's, where can we be authentic? And I think that goes to sort of the value play. And, those are sort of like the key questions we ask up front in sort of making a decision on what are the channels we should invest in. Because just like, Rishi mentioned, there's lots of channels, there's lots of emerging channels. But I think a pragmatic view is, start with your audience. Where can you engage them? How can you add value to their lives?
Right. Well, influencers, especially digital opinion leaders who've created their own distinct brands, are on everybody's mind. So how valuable are DOLs for pharma marketers, and how do we assess their contributions? Danny, go ahead.
Well, look, I think we have to look at them as independent players with independent voices and independent brands, which is a little troubling for pharma marketers because we have to give up some control, and we've got to co-create messaging with people in their own voices that might be irritant to us, or voices that might clash with a kind of scientific mentality. So selecting them carefully is important. We have digital opinion leaders that are like the mad prophet of the airwaves, and we have digital opinion leaders that are kind of like academic experts teaching you how to do the Canadian technique in surgery, and kind of everything in between. So finding the right DOL, working with somebody who has the credibility. And to Agatha's earlier point, You don't need to be a Kardashian here. You don't have to have 1.5 million viewers. Sometimes if you've got 10,000 urologists following you, your level of persuasion, your level of influence, and your level of your ability to help a brand can be much stronger than somebody that might have 1 million, partly 1 million followers, partly paying attention.
Yeah, I really always kind of appreciate sort of Danny's rigor and thinking about these things. But, you know, when you're planning sort of your DOLs, you know, it's really kind of also organizing and asking your brand, you know, hard questions about like, what are your strategic pillars? Don't expect one DOL to do lots of things. So know what are the check boxes. You need an educator, you need somebody to elevate the brand, or you need somebody for reach, and evaluate those DOLs based on what they can deliver. So the person who's delivering engagement, give them the right KPI. So they are about videos viewed, conversations had. The reach, check that box. They have a wide audience. And I think that actually helps you hedge your bets in terms of the conversation you want to have as a brand. And you really kind of, it's also another way, you know, another view of sort of the funnel. So who are your awareness players? Who are your one-to-one conversations? And I would say that really kind of also applies sort of in picking your influencers.
Yeah, you make a really good point that, you know, you might want an educator, you might want a salesman, you might want an academician, you might want a clinician, you might want somebody with kind of a broad industry overview. So understanding the role that they're going to play is going to help guide the kinds of DOLs that you talk to and the kind of DOLs that you vet.
Yeah, I think Agatha, you know, kind of hit the nail right on the head right there, where, you know, one influencer can't do it all, right? And you need many to kind of carry your brand voice forward based on your business objectives. You know, but I would just kind of point out that as brand marketers, you know, we really need to be aware of finding the right influencers, right? You know, for every brand, having a Kardashian spokesperson, you know, isn't the right play here, right? You know, maybe we should start looking at and the micro and the nano influencers, you know, who are really, really big, authentic voices in their communities, but they have less than 100,000, you know, followers, but they have incredibly high engagement rates, right? So when they speak, people listen, right? It's these smaller influencers that might be able to move mountains, you know, for our brands. So when you're looking at what your influencer strategy should be, think about, you know, having a mix, you know, as Agatha and Danny were saying, of having many different types of influencers, you know, who can pool various levers, you know, to ultimately reach our business objectives.
Yeah, so we've touched a little bit on this next question, which is also on DOLs, but, you know, how to assess them, et cetera. But how do we integrate them, the DOLs, into campaigns? And it's kind of what's the best way to deal with them? Danny.
Well, I think you need to establish what role they're going to play. Are they going, and also where in the sequence of messaging they're going to fall? Are they going to be introductory? Are they going to be, you know, using their bullhorn to announce a new brand or a new technique or a new medication or a new treatment strategy? Or are they going to play backup, where a traditional KOL might lay out the scientific case and a DOL might anticipate or proactively answer some of the most likely frequently asked questions or objections or pushback. So where you place them is critically important. How you train them is critically important. And more importantly, how you vet them is critically important. Now, we at LiveWorld and Grain Group have a patented program called the 5 A's that look at 5 different ways to assess the value of a DOL, and which also points to the level of integration. So it starts with the audience. Who are they reaching? And not only the number of people they're reaching, but what the specialty is. It tends to break down by specialty. So are they gastroenterologists? Are they anesthesiologists? Are they urologists? Are they cardiac surgeons? Who are we talking to and how big an audience is there? Then we need to understand their background, their academics, and their associations. Then we need to also understand their altitude and their attitude. Do they have a standing point of view? Some people come into the market with a clear point of view. It's going to be unchanged by new data. Other people are more malleable. Also, the level of conversation. Is it super scientific? Is it popular language? What is the altitude and what is the attitude? And lastly, we want to understand their access. Are they willing to deal with us? We're going to have to go through med legal. They're going to have to be willing to give on certain kinds of things. We know for sure that there's going to be a limited willingness to toe the party line, that creative's going to be in their own voice and in their own manner. It's going to be backed up with data that they feel makes their case. So understanding that and understanding the attitude and sensibility of med legal to make that happen is going to be critical.
Yeah.
Yep.
And, just to, add to what Danny's saying, I think the other, thing that we're really asking our brands to consider is that it's a real commitment, especially sort of on social platforms. You're co-creating, you're working with them, try to think of sort of a longer term relationship, because conversations or getting to know your brand takes time. Otherwise, run a banner ad, or, you can, run some digital creative. This is your opportunity for a real long form sort of conversation, not just long form content. And I think the deeper the relationship that you have, I think the value of that influencer or KOL, that is going to be realized over time, versus sort of a short-term window when you're looking at impressions or click-through rates. So that's kind of one measurement shift that we're looking at when working with influencers. The other point with working with influencers, another thing that we talk about, you have lots of different influencers. They might be working against different objectives and have different roles. But one thing you want to do is keep consistent sort of that playbook. Make sure that every influencer within a strategic pillar, and this goes back to sort of organization, they all have the same playbook. That is the only way you can measure the impact of how hard one influencer is working versus another. And it's still the mentality of like, that just gives you the opportunity to optimize. And then once you have those clear pillars, everyone has their playbook. And part of that playbook is defining like very, very clear success goals. What is your awareness KOL supposed to do versus your engagement KOL? And those things will also start to define what that influencer program is like, and what materials they're getting. And, how are you committed to working with them over time?
I couldn't agree more there, right? I feel like the playbook is what sets up the guardrails, between this partnership, this marriage between brand marketers and influencers. But once that playbook and the guardrails are in place, you kind of have to let the bird free, as you will, and let the influencer kind of be themselves, right? As pharma marketers, we're working with influencers because they have such a great voice, they're authentic, and they have amazing engagement rates with their followers, and they only get all that because they are speaking in their own brand voice. I can't tell you how many times we've heard in conversations, well, I want to redline everything the influencer does, and I want to give them exactly what they have to say. Well, that's not how influencer marketing works, right? We have to let these influencers be themselves, be who they are. We may not agree with them, sometimes, but as long as they're adhering to the guardrails we put up in our contract, we kind of have to let them fly after that.
All right. Well, let's shift gears here and talk about MarTech. So what changes in thinking and data structures and automation, hardware, software, and other technology do we need to prepare for? Agatha, why don't you kick us off here?
Yeah, I think this is such a critical time for pharma marketers to start with sort of an audit, know kind of what your current assets are, and your assets could be data. You could already have some technology or software in place. You may have your Snowflake instance. You might have your visualization tool. You might have a, Salesforce. Know what your assets are and evaluate how you're using them. And sometimes they may be as simple as, updating how you're using them, or making sure that you're building bridges between your systems. And I think that's an audit is always kind of a good place to start. And, you know, I think MarTech is sort of becoming its own conversation. There's a lot there, also relating to data, because you have to understand what data you want to collect. But sort of the hard strategic question for like sort of the C-suite to really have is, you know, what are our business goals? What are the decisions we have to make? And again, sort of the framework there is, what are your short-term decisions? What are your long-term decisions? How do you scenario plan? And I think those business questions will help sort of guide what MarTech systems you need to implement. And your data structure, that is related to your scenario planning, like, and how do you need to future-proof your business? What are your immediate threats? So it always goes back to the strategy, but the data structure, if you do it right, because you're asking yourselves the right questions, your data structure should shine a light on those, answering those questions for you.
Excellent. So kind of another question right on the tail of this one is data and technology infrastructure, it's become more important than ever. So how does this impact effective and efficient marketing, media spend, and customer engagement? Rishi or Danny, you want to get in on this one?
Sure.
Well,
I think, go ahead, Rishi.
So I was just going to say, you know, from an implementation standpoint, you know, when it comes to data and technology infrastructure, you know, as pharma marketers, you know, one of the very first things that we need to do is we need to ensure that our corporate data teams are aligned with our vision, you know, when it comes to implementing, you know, a given tech stack. So, you know, when it comes to implementing new marketing technologies, we all want to make sure that everyone has a seat at the table in the early days, right? And they're there to kind of define and help us define our early business objectives and our keys to success, so they can, you know, really help us kind of shepherd these new technologies into our groups, and that way it also becomes easier for when we're trying to, you know, as we said to our very first question when we opened this up, you know, how do we kind of drive, you know, more omnichannel progress? You know, when we're connecting those back-end pipes, we'll want to have a clear, you know, partnership between corporate data teams and corporate Marcom teams, you know, to ensure everything is connected. So I would just say, you know, early days before we start any engagement, you know, make sure everyone's in that first meeting, make sure everyone's on board, and then we can kind of move forward.
Yeah, I think
you want to get on this. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, you know, when we talked about early on, sort of, you know, increasing investment in digital, you're going to get a ton of information back. And that means you're going to have a lot of demands on that data. And just that information back, you have to treat it as an asset. Why I think it's so critical right now is, you know, it's the mindset that, you know, if you're investing in your MarTech, or the reason why you should invest in your MarTech, or why it should be an important commitment that you make in 2022, 2023 ongoing, is because it's what's going to allow you to make data-based decisions versus theoretical decisions. It's going to allow you to optimize and just know that your competitive set, that is going to be their competitive advantage. And I think being able to make data-based decisions, if everyone's doing it, that kind of levels out the playing field. And that's where we're always trying to advise our clients on, is how do we minimize sort of competitive advantage from other competitors. I think having clean data, having good data, a good data structure, that is the new competitive advantage versus just having a strong MarTech stack. And I think the other thing that I would, you know, want to talk to sort of brands about is that, you know, moving to, you know, sort of this MarTech data conversation, it actually shifts you from always being in planning, always being able to adjust kind of your strategic plans, versus we made our 2023 plan, we're implementing it. Here, you're going to get feedback, and, you know, where you started may not be where you end, but you're going to have an optimized output.
Yep. Yeah, Danny, anything to add there?
Well, I would say that the critical thing for pharma marketers is to know the structure. So every brand has to have some kind of tech stack, but don't leave it to the agency and don't leave it to the IT guys and don't leave it to the decision science guys. You've got to understand what these structures are, how they work, what they do, so you can have A, critical input, and B, make critical judgments when people bring to you and say, we could do it this way or we could do it that way. If you know how Google Analytics works, if you know how your automation system works, if you're using Hootsuite, if you're familiar with the technology, you can have a meaningful input into that conversation. If you've left it to the agency or to some other department to do it, you're flying blind and you're relying on other people's judgment, which may or may not serve your brand the best way.
Yep, and speaking of Google Analytics, so Google's forthcoming GA4 release and privacy data-driven rules in social media is going to change the game of targeting, reporting, CRM, and personalization. So what's the near-term strategy for pharma and hospital brands? Agatha?
Yeah, I mean, I think the, sort of immediate sort of focus because of this shift is that it is forcing the conversation. You don't have the luxury of time or sort of theoretical debate. It's forcing sort of your hand to have a data strategy. It's forcing your hand and taking ownership of sort of your first party data and making first party data sort of a priority. And I think there's lots of sort of other dependencies that kind of fall out of that. But what's sort of good is that now we have some clarity that is, one true north that we have to focus on. And if we focus on that, I think, that kind of simplifies things in lots of ways. I think that in itself is a big question, but it is simplified because we all have to kind of rally around that particular need for a data strategy. And I would, things that we're working with our clients on and things that we're talking about is road mapping. So this should not be, you have time. This should not be yesterday and then tomorrow. You should be making steps to kind of getting to when GA4 is mandatory for everyone.
Completely agree. It's going to change the world. I know we're going to be deep into it. Anybody else? Rishi, Danny on this one? Yeah. All right, let's move on. So this is really kind of the wrap-up question here. This is what keeps you awake at night. So what's your biggest marketing, communications, or promotion worry for 2023? Rishi, you want to start there?
Yeah, so I think my biggest challenge and worry for 2023 is pharma marketers just getting too comfortable with the status quo, right? We know Meta has changed the way pharma and healthcare can target on its platform. We know that new content types, like TikTok and rapid moving content, content that's less than 35 seconds is kind of going gangbusters right now. And we know that the walled gardens, are where, HCPs are kind of going to get that P2P, peer-to-peer education, right? So as pharma marketers, we can't get comfortable, with and the way things were and with our channel ratio, from the last, 5 years. We really need to keep adapting and really keep innovating and kind of moving forward. So I just say, let's embrace the 80, 15-5 rules, right? So 80% keep focusing on the tried and true core platforms. 15%, look at where therapeutic conversations are happening for disease state awareness on social and pilot those. And then 5%, really focus on innovation. Let's see what's coming down the pike. Let's go touch a few shiny objects, but not too many. And then really help those brand teams kind of elevate their offerings. So, when they do keep growing, we as pharma marketers are strategically there to, take advantage of them.
Yeah, go ahead, Daniel.
Well, I'm going to echo what Rishi said. I think the thing that keeps me up awake at night is the fact that the pharma marketers yearn for a formula. In the old days, there was a formula. You get some KOLs, you get some articles, you get some clinical data, you get some trial information, you go to some congresses, you send out some emails, and bingo, presto, things are good. The environment is much changed. It's much more dynamic. It's much more confusing. There's lots of details and innovating, adding functions and features. So it's, it's a blooming, buzzing, confusing mess. that we have to confront rather than hope for a kind of a simple plug in the data kind of formula. So I would encourage pharma marketers to be open to new ideas, to take seriously Rishi's idea about innovation, and also to think about creativity. You know, we've moved a little bit away from the dog on the beach. We've moved a little bit away from the creative cliches in pharma marketing and pharma creative, but we've still got a long way to go. So don't be content with what we have. Look to the future, be open to new ideas, and embrace the craziness.
Yeah, and I think, because probably we work in the same sort of space, we all sort of share sort of the same anxiety, but just offering something a little bit more abstract, which is, we have to be comfortable with the uncomfortable. I think that is the new reality, because we are dependent on so many other sort of players. We are dependent on regulators. We are dependent on sort of social media platforms and how they're changing. And I think we just have to build that flexibility or change into our new reality. Other things that, I think the marketer, sort of the marketing mindset is changing. And the anxiety here is that as a marketer, now a brand marketer in pharma, you have to see the big picture and you have to know the details. You actually have to know how your data is being collected, how your data is, how is it protected? You have to know how it's organized. You have to have input on how you want to name them because you know what decisions you need to make. At the same time, you need to know the big picture of, impact, launches, everything else. I think really you got to also be able to switch gears very quickly. You have to see the big picture and switch gears to the details, nonstop, and it's constant gear shifting. But in that sense, I think it's exciting. I think it's an opportunity to get increased sophistication, which just makes, better marketers.
Excellent. Great discussion. Okay, well, that wraps it up for today. I hope everybody found this discussion helpful and instructive as you plan out your 2023 marketing playbooks. I'd like to thank our panelists for their time and their expertise. Thank you, guys. And if you weren't able to capture all the points made here today, don't worry, we'll send out the key takeaways from today's session as a follow-up action. So thank you all for attending, and goodbye for now.